This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for How to Super Age with Elise Marie Collins. And Elise, I'm really excited today because typically you've had female guests. Today, you have a gentleman with us, and I have a feeling we're going to get a totally different perspective on what it means to super age today. So tell us who you have.
Okay, before we get to our guest, I just want to hold my book up. It's not how to super age. The podcast tells you how to super age.
Right.
The book, Super Ager. You can look younger, have more energy, a better memory, and live a long and healthy life. We'll leave the link for the book. It gives you inspiration and instructions. But what are instructions if we're not inspired? Because we get a lot of information on how to age well. We hear it in the news. I just heard some news about, we have daylight savings in the US, and we do have clocks, circadian clocks in our brains that help us, time things. But when they get thrown off, so you can get thrown off during daylight savings. So I heard on the news that you should go out into the light. And I know that it's in my book, but we hear the news, and we're going to be hearing lots of news from our guest today, not just news, but tips and tricks and inspiration. That's why the podcast is so great, because we get inspiration from real people telling their real stories about how they're aging, how they're living in the world, living better. The book just gives you more stories, more tips and tricks, but it's interwoven because we can't have one without the other. If I just tell you to go exercise, you might, but you need, when we hear a story about someone who is maybe 100 years old running in a race, they do have senior Olympics and different events. I know someone who's a heart patient. He might come on. He had a complete heart bypass, and now he's a champion wow. runner. So these are the inspiring stories we bring you. I'm going to put my book down, and I'm going to introduce our guest. And I did notice that we haven't had men. So it's funny because I was like, wow, I never noticed that. So I'm biased. But I'm going to introduce our guest today. We have Henry M. Quinlan, and you can correct me if I didn't pronounce that right. He is the owner and publisher of Omni Publishing Company, and he's had over 40 years of varied experience publishing books. And I want to hear a little bit about that because I'm also a published author, and I work with other women authors. That's why we probably have more women. Some of them are authors that I've met through my work in women's publishing. He's a graduate of Boston College and Suffolk University Law School. While engaged in a publishing venture in the former Soviet Union, oh, that's interesting. I also did Soviet studies, was my interest in college. Henry Quinlan was asked by President George H. Bush to organize the publishing of the children's book Make Way for Ducklings in Russia in 1991, and the erection of statues Make Way for Ducklings in Moscow. Wonderful. Currently, Henry Quinlan is helping senior citizens self-publish their life stories as a memoir or autobiography, and is publishing books under the Omni print. I'm so excited to talk to him, and it segues perfectly from last week's guest, who was a storyteller, and she's writing her memoir. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about, I know we're going to talk about something called how to build your emotional pension, which I can't wait. But just before we get into that, so it will seamlessly go from last week to this week for our listeners, could you tell us a little bit about how you help older adults publish their stories?
Sure. When I semi-retired, I developed, someone asked me to develop a program how to teach people to write their story and to self-publish it. This was at the beginning of the self-publishing boom, so to speak. And so I started going around to senior groups, telling them how to write their story. And so along the way, some people asked me to help them. And I did two books in particular that are really outstanding in my mind. One was by a man who was 88 years old. He wrote his story by hand, 66,000 words. The other man was a retired professor emeritus at MIT. He wrote his book, 325 pages. But the real important feature is that both of them were totally energized by the whole process of writing their story and then going out and working on the publicity of it and selling the book. To the tune where the man who was 88, he was so enthused, he got married at 90 and made
Wow.
2 trips to Ireland to publish, to promote his book. And the other man enjoyed his, and he was a great, well-known, internationally well-known professor of engineering. But he just loved the whole process. And I mean, and I then went on to see other people in their 60s and 70s do the same thing. And I have yet to see anything energize a senior like writing their story. And it's really a wonderful experience. And I've done books, help people. One man wanted a very intimate book, just 10 copies for his family. And that was his need. That's all he wanted to do. Another man he had a memoir, slice of his life. He was so happy with that. He printed 5,000 copies, gave himself a book publishing party at Mar-a-Lago, and gave all the books away. Everyone is different. And so it's just truly a great experience. And
Wow.
it's from there in my interaction with seniors where I started to recognize in talking to seniors afterwards in particular, that a lot of seniors weren't prepared for the emotional side of retirement. So I started developing my presentation on how to build your emotional pension. And it's based on the fact that 99% of all information about retirement is financial. So people focus on the financial, and I've had this comment to me many times. I was so intent on the financial part. Once actual retirement happened, I was blindsided by the emotional issues that come up. And so that's how I developed that program. And I
Wow.
give both of them, but I still, in what I think is the best is for people to write their story. It's just truly remarkable how they get engaged with that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm wondering if you think that people develop health issues, because I know when people retire, often their health declines. Do you think it's because they're not emotionally prepared?
Yes. Boredom sets in. And then people, I gave my talk about financial emotional pension to a podcast of financial advisors. And one of the things I said, you people in the financial world, you paint a picture of retirement as 2 very good looking men and women with silver hair dancing on the beach. That's not America. That's not most people.
Right.
People see that and say, what's wrong with me? As a matter of fact, the guest said, as a comment afterwards, he said, as you're saying that, Henry, I reviewed our marketing material. You're absolutely right. That's the image we promoted. And so it bothers a lot of people. What's wrong with me that I don't have that life? And that's totally, it's a fictitious life. So
Well,
people
and
don't know how.
it's interesting because as we get closer to retirement, those financial advisors come out of the closet, they find us and they start
They do
asking,
indeed.
yeah, and they start asking us, so what does your portfolio look like? And I remember when my husband and I were going on to 65 and both being pushed out of corporate America, we had a financial advisor say to us, why don't you have more money saved up? And when we tried to explain what our lifestyle had been, we weren't spending the money to be frivolous, but we had gone through a lot of downs and then we'd come up and go down. And so we didn't have that bucket. And what we were looking for was to find a way to continue doing some work but we knew those stories were fictitious about, going off to your winter home,
Right, right.
because who can do that today other than the very wealthy?
Yeah.
Well, even with them, I mean, there's been just some terrific studies done, but there's a honeymoon period in retirement where I'm gonna travel the world. I'm gonna play golf every day. But that wears off soon
Yeah.
enough. Then the boredom sets in. And Columbia University, the Butler School of Aging, did a fascinating study on people. They followed 20 people in their 80s, couples and individuals in New York City for 2 years, their daily life. And every one of them were very happy with it. But one of the findings is most interesting about money. Once they had their housing and food, money never entered the picture about what the quality of their life and their happiness.
Got it.
But listen, the financial world, they'll tell you it's all about that. But I've talked to so many seniors who said, I focus on, then what happens? And then the other part of the people become reclusive. Men in particular, men have a much harder time than women, but they just don't know what to do. From a corporate executive, I'm a corporate executive, my identity. Well, you're not, and you have to accept you're no longer. So my favorite story is actually a classmate of mine who was a top executive in an international company. And he retired and he had a beautiful home in the Hamptons. He was divorced. So I called him and he said, "God, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm doing nothing. I'm not going to do anything. I'm living the good life." And I said, "Don't you think you should do something?" He said, "No, I'm doing it." So I talked to him about 8 minutes later and I could hear it in his voice. He said, "You're never going to guess what I did." I said, "No, I don't." He said, "I got so damn bored. I'm looking in the paper and I saw a job for a doorman at a resort." He said, "I applied and I got it." He says, 3 days a week, I'm meeting people, few bucks, money doesn't mean anything. But he said, I'm just outside enjoying myself. The key is he put his ego in his pocket. And I've seen and police officers ever had time, they used the power. So they used to tell people, "You move," and they move. Now they're in retirement, they say, "Move." And the guy looks, "Who the hell are you?" And that loss of power. I know a bank president. He's very glum. And I asked his wife one day, "What's the problem?" No one calls him. Well, why should they? He's not a bank president. But they can't, giving up those power and who they used to be, loss of identity. Used to be a breadwinner, not now. It's very difficult for men.
Absolutely.
So I go through a whole series, what the things that they can do. And grandparenting, I do a lot about grandparenting, for example. I tell the story, my oldest grandson is 2 years old. He's now 22, but when he was 2, he has a birthday party. He has his friends and cousins sitting around the table. And I'm saying, well, in-laws and outlaws. And I said, does he really care that I'm here? And the answer was no. So the next day, I guess for weeks afterwards, I started thinking about it. And then I decided I'm not going to any more birthday parties. What I'm going to do is take them out individually on their birthday. So 20 years later, we have built up a great relationship. Now I have 6 of them, so I do it with all of them. But the beauty is now they're in their teenagers and they'll say to me, "Hey, Grandpa, when's our birthday party at dinner?" And so I built one-on-one relationships with them, and it's just great experience.
I love that story. I did hear that story on your Facebook page, and just to underline it, take your grandchildren. If you have grandchildren, you could also take out another, there's lots of kids that would love to have an older adult friend. We talk about intergenerational relationships on this podcast. So some people don't have grandchildren or may have grandchildren, but there's lots of ways to get involved with younger people. And I love that. Take them out for their birthday. That's so brilliant. It's just absolutely Fantastic. And I did want to just quickly share that in Superager, I did talk about one of the inspirational people in the book is Iris. I can't remember her last name, but she's very iconic. She's a lady with these big black glasses, and she's a designer. You guys have seen her image. She's a designer, and she talks about how, you know, how all the brochures for either senior communities or places where older adults live, they all have people in canoes. So I always think of the canoe image, rowing in a boat. And it's like, she's like, that's not me. She's a New Yorker. She's a designer. She's now, I think she's 95 or 96. She's designing. She's gotten like really popular in her 90s. And yeah, so I just wanted to see that. And yeah, I understand it's different for men. Is there any other little exercises or tips that you have for our listeners besides that birthday one, or anything they should be watching?
Well, the other one I do with my grandchildren is I have a Christmas party for them every year, just the grandchildren, no parents.
Interesting.
And here again, what that has done is brought them all together. One of my granddaughters actually said at my 80th birthday, you know, if it wasn't for Grandpa's bringing us all together at Christmas time, I don't know if I'd know my cousins that well and have the good relationships. So that's another thing. And then if you're really infectious, I mean, you got to be spontaneous in life. Out of being older, you just, if you want to do it, why not? So one of my granddaughters said to me, Grandpa, you're coming up on 80, let's go skydiving. I said, sure, why not? So off we went. And so that kind of thing, it was a wonderful experience, principally because it was with my granddaughter.
Wow. Were you scared? What was it like?
Well, the interesting part was you're sitting on the plane and there's a man attached to you. And he says, get near the edge, put your feet over, and we're just going to inch out. Well, as I got near the edge, he just pushed me. So I was out before I knew it.
I love it.
So it was a great experience.
Just like President Bush, that's what he wanted to do.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And you know, Henry, what you're telling us is that if we look forward at the things that we would like to do, we don't have to make a lot of time for it. We have to make some time for those things. Because if we don't, you know, we are going to end up sitting on a porch in a rocking chair and nobody's going to notice us.
That's right. What I started with was the premise is what people don't understand is when you retire, you have 200 hours a month to fill. And you start thinking about that. And I'm not saying, you know, line item every half hour, something like that, but that gives you an idea of how much time you do have to fill. And again, I'll refer to my own experiences, people I know, the ones who don't do it for reasons that are unique to them, fear is a big one, but they deteriorate physically and emotionally. And I've seen it, you know, now I'm 82 and I have friends who, you know, they're looking down and it's not a good thing.
Do you mean they didn't plan what to do with those 200 hours?
Not only didn't plan, they didn't want to, they were afraid of. One man I know was a big time corporate executive and he couldn't move himself beyond that.
Yeah.
You know, that's not what I should be in Florida in a home. So I go down to Florida and I met this man. He said, Henry, you should come down here. I said, really, why? He said, well, you play golf every day. I said, well, I play tennis. So he said, okay, play tennis. So I said, all right, I play tennis. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. What do I do now? And he said, well, you talk about where you're going to have dinner at night. I said, don't you really want more out of life than that? So I've come to say to people, what I'm really talking about is it's your choice. And if you want to have that quiet, boring life, you're leaving an awful lot of life on the table. And you may have
Absolutely.
20 or 25 years, and that's a long time.
Yeah.
Really not enjoy your life. So I started with my first title for my presentation was, "Don't forget to bounce the last check." Scared the hell out of people. What's he saying? And so now I tell the story. I was in New York, living in New York, and I met a man who was a psychiatrist who from Seattle who came to New York because he was dying. And he came to take it out on his counselor. He said, "I'm going to give him hell. I'm mad as hell that I'm dying." But make a long story short, we talked an awful lot for the next couple of weeks. We met dinners and coffee. So one day I said to him, "When people finish counseling, how does it end? Do they say, 'I'm out of here'? You say, 'Get out of here'? Or do you negotiate?" He said, "There's both. Some people leave. Some people I say, 'This is not for you.' But he said 90+% is we negotiate. And then when they get to the front door of my office, I say, 'Hey, don't forget to bounce the last check.'" He said, "If they look at me with a sense of shock," he says, "we didn't connect. But if they smile," I said, "they got it." And because all I mean is live life to the fullest till the end.
Yeah.
That's the best advice I can give anyone.
Absolutely. And the sad part in our society today is that we look at people and we determine their age. So we may
Yeah,
not know how old they are.
yeah,
We
yeah,
determine
yeah.
their age, and then we determine what they should and shouldn't be doing.
Right, right,
And
right.
recently, I had somebody who was looking to do podcasting with us, and the first question out of their mouth was, "Karen, how old are you?" And I said, "Does that make a difference?" And they said, "Well, I want to know if you're going to be around tomorrow." And I said, "Well,
Whoa.
how old are you?" And they told me. And I said, "So are you going to be around tomorrow? Do you have a crystal ball?"
Yeah, yeah.
And it was like, if I have the ability and you like what I'm doing, I'll be around for as
Yeah,
long as I can be. And this
yeah.
person just didn't get it. And then they finally called me back and said, "You know what? I like your attitude." And I said, "I've got a lot of fire in me." So we have to stop looking at the color of our hair,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
clothes we wear,
yeah.
and
The
identify.
externals.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's again the reason why the people who aren't dancing on the beach, they think I should be dancing on the beach and I'm not, so something's wrong with me. And it's a false value all the way around.
Yeah, yeah. I hear a lot of, I mean, to me, it's like you've talked about the corporate executive who loses his identity. I wonder too, as the baby boomers and women, my mom was a little ahead of her time. She had a career back in the 50s. She went to law school. I know you went to law school. And she's actually doing great because she's got that chutzpah. She's got that like get her done. She's, I say she's still kicking over tables at 91 because she loves music. She's very involved in the opera and different music. She's on boards, so she's got this purpose and people really don't even know how old she is. I was at the opera the other night and someone, a retired doctor came up to her and said, "Now how," we started talking about aging and he said, "Well, how old are you?" It was in a nice way. He said, "Do you mind if I ask?" And she said her real age. Sometimes she just kind of evades the question. He's like, "Wow, I've got like great respect for you," because he knows that she's still very active, very involved. She advises boards on their, what do you call that? The board, the laws, they're not laws, but you know what I mean? What you need to follow. So I wonder though, I wonder if it's men that are more attached to their identities. I think maybe with women like my mom, you do sort of have identity as a mom and other things, or at least in her era, women were meant to, or most of her friends at least got married right out of college. It was much more a pressure to have kids right away. She had kids later.
Right.
I wonder if that identity thing will shift. But anyway, what I wanted to say too, with men and women, it's like it's all about coming into your heart. Like, what is your purpose for this sometimes called the third act or this
Right.
yeah,
right,
the
right,
third act. And you
right.
have to drop into your heart. And maybe some of the people you're talking about, they've not done that. I can imagine a male corporate executive. It's like he's not open-hearted, like, I mean, and not maybe with his family, but like that's something where your purpose to me, I'm standing up so you can see me tapping my chest because I'm a yoga teacher. So I do try to get people to be in their heart. So anything about you could say about being in your heart, Henry?
Well, I mean, what I talk about is when you're looking to do what you want to do in your last part, this is your time. Now it's time for some introspection.
Yeah.
And you have to go deep. And as an example, who are you? What are you always meant to be? And think back on those times in your life when you're doing something and the time is not an issue. You're totally absorbed in it. And you start linking those times, and that gives you a little bit of a window into your soul, who you really are.
Yeah.
It's very important to do that introspection, really discover yourself. That's scary to a lot of people. Many people don't want to do it for a variety of reasons, fear being the primary one.
Yeah.
So that's, and then what we're finding today is, the biggest divorce rate is between 55 and 65.
Mhm.
Often women launching their careers or a mid-career because they stayed home with the kids, and the husband now he's home, he's retired, so he expects, well, we're going to travel. And the wife says, no, we're not. I got appointments next week. So those kind of conflicts are built in. That's why there's a big divorce problem. Then,
Mhm.
of course, there's the alcohol and drug issue.
Yeah.
So much
Absolutely.
free time. I've had many people say to me, next one man in particular, I spoke to the mass teacher, retired teachers, and he said, I had so much time. Next thing I know, I was in an AA meeting. It just creeps up on you. And oh, yeah, let's have a drink and so forth and so on. So,
Almost like the pandemic, I know a lot of people, I don't know the statistics or, I don't know the exact numbers, but yeah, I heard that a lot during the pandemic, like, because you're home and you're working, but still you're not doing things, just it's easier to drink or whatever your,
Inclination.
drug escape of choice. And yeah, and so that totally makes sense. What I know you said that you told me there's something about critical thinking. How does that play into retirement?
well, we're at a time when there's so much information coming at us from all the media. And so, what's true and why should you believe some people? And this is such an important topic that the Harvard University class of 2020, their speaker was the editor of the Washington Post, and the topic was critical thinking. And this is something that's what you do is someone says something and you say, why should I believe him or her? So you start lining up. What are they? What's their backgrounds? Let's say it's a doctor. What's he talking about? Well, if he's talking about plumbing, he has no credibility. But if he's a heart surgeon, he's talking about heart, okay, that's good. Now, the next thing, what's his experience? Is he a doctor with 6 months experience or 20 years? That all goes into how you evaluate what you're being told. So you have to ask those questions down the line to get credibility, why I should believe this man. Or the other one that I like to think of is why am I being told this? Who benefits?
Mm-hmm.
And the story I tell is about just in the middle of the pandemic, president of a pharmaceutical company said, I feel duty bound to tell the public that we've had some success with our anti-COVID vaccination tests. And that was it. No evidence, no nothing. And I thought that was a curious statement. Next day, 2 days later, I find out why. the top executives in his company, based on that statement, the stock went up when they sold their stock for $30 million. So why am I being told that? They're not telling me for anything. They're telling for their stock price. So you have to evaluate. And now with so much information, so many people, I mean, just the other day, we heard a football player talking about he did his research about vaccines. What the hell kind of qualifications does he have to do research about vaccines? So it's so much of it is common sense, but it seems to be getting away from us.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
for your own protection, I believe you have to use critical thinking.
Well, and don't you believe that because information supposedly is at our fingertips, we don't pay attention online where that information is coming from?
Right,
Because
absolutely.
yesterday I had to do a search on a new medication I'm taking. And I realized that the first 5 entries were ads. Okay.
Right,
Was
right.
not the information. Okay. When I finally got to the information, okay, I then realized I had to dig even deeper.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
in the meantime, my doctor's office had given me the information underneath one of the ads.
yeah.
And so I had to tell his staff, you're absolutely wrong. Okay. And
Yeah.
I had a meeting with the doctor today, and he said, thank you for advising my staff because they should know better.
Yeah.
But it's easy. If that first thing pops up and says, this is the information, so many of us take it and run with it.
All right. I'm totally embarrassed that a good portion of our Congress believes global warming is a joke.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I think also there is, well, it could be at any age, but technology does give us so much information overload. And I don't think it's age dependent because it's really more your experience. Last week we had my friend who's also a storyteller, my friend and guest, Kate Farrell, and she's a librarian and librarians were early adopters of the internet. So now I say she trains 20-year-olds in the organization I work with because she knows how our website is set up. But what I'm getting at is, for my parents, sometimes I'm helping them with technology, and I know sometimes they get pop-ups or calls. And if that person invokes fear, like, give me your password, sometimes you forget the critical thinking. You forget, oh, who is this person? Why do they want my info? Because if they say to you, I know this is a tactic, they say to you something scary and you forget, like, why is this person asking me? They're not really from Bank of America, and they just asked for my password. Is there anything, I know this might be not emotional pension, but I think that there's some vulnerabilities with each generation. Who knows, for the younger people, when they're older, there's going to be some vulnerability for them, something they're not.
Sure.
Yeah. What do you
Human nature.
Yeah.
Human nature.
Taking advantage. But how do we nurture that? If somebody is afraid of going inward, maybe that was something, for me, again, I'm a yoga teacher. I try to teach people that so that they're prepared when they get older. And that's why I think things like yoga, meditation, whatever works for you. It doesn't have to be those particular practices. But how do you help somebody who hasn't really done any sort of, I'll call it, inner exploration? Like, it is hard, I'll take my dad, for example, like, he wouldn't, I don't think he knows how to do that. What would you say to him? What would be an easy in to get him to, what can I say to him?
Well, I mean, he should explore those kinds of issues with a good friend, someone who's non-threatening to him.
Yeah.
And but the basis I say to people too is you should have a circle of friendship, family and friends who are positive. Do not surround yourself with Debbie Downers. because if they can be a real, or John Downers, they can be a real negative impact on your life. You want to surround yourself with people who are optimistic and can help you. If you have a down day, it's great to pick up a phone because you know the person at the other end is going to be happy to hear from you. And that's right there, then and there, is really a good thing. But find that person who you can confide in. And that's the key. I tell the same thing about writing a book. Have one person who, as you write a chapter, give it to them. Does this make sense? And they have to be totally honest with you. They can't be, a good friend. Oh, it's great. No, you want an honest assessment.
Yeah, that's so important. Finding those trusted people who will tell us the truth,
Yes.
and not in a way that's, mean or just, yeah,
No,
that's,
it'll help you.
yeah,
That's the good news.
Do you find that men are more supportive of men than women are of women? Because I'm finding
No.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Men are more individual. Women are much more social. I've had many times when I speak at these senior groups, men will say to me, I want you to tell me how to make new friends. All my friends have died. Something as basic as that, but good for them to recognize the issue and to come seek help. But that's men, and I tell the story of 4 men that I know who meet every morning to solve the world's problems at a coffee shop. And then one of them said, one day, hey, we all got time, we all have money, why don't we do something? Help a neighbor fix a yard or whatever it is. And they go around the table. One man said, hell no. He said, I have 100 books I'm going to read. Another guy says, I am going to watch every movie ever made. Another guy says, I'm going to sit in my butt, do nothing. And that's a problem with men. They're not as social. They find it very difficult to move out of their sphere. That's why I love telling the story of my friend who became a doorman. He absolutely put his ego in his pocket. And he opened himself up to just something that he really enjoys doing.
Absolutely. Wow.
That's the key. Get rid of the fear.
I love that story. He's someone who lives in the Hamptons and then he became a doorman. I'm going to take that and run with it because it so beautifully explains a lot of things too. In fact, I was in a discussion group recently and somebody pointed out a similar thing where a younger person, I'd say they were maybe between 30 and 60, we'll say. I don't know how old they were, but they said, well, I really get upset when I see the older adults working in Walmart, and then people were like, oh yeah, that's not good. That's not good. But then someone else pointed out, like my mom or my older grandparent works at Walmart because they love it. So sometimes we don't know if it's necessity or if it's just they love being around people because,
you don't walk in their shoes.
Yeah, you don't walk in their shoes. And I wonder if this plays a part in your idea of emotional pension. Sometimes, and I've been guilty of this myself, I've become more aware of it because I do have a degree in gerontology that I got in the past 5 years, but almost, I don't want to say babying, it might not be the right word, but where we sort of, as children, I'm not a kid, but as having older parents or older adults in our family, sometimes we think, oh, should they be doing that? Is that safe? Where often I think the older parents and grandparents, they usually have a good idea of what they're capable of. Do you have any examples of that where?
Sure I do. Again, go back to the Columbia study. One of the findings of that, you are as old as you think you are.
Absolutely.
And they talk about people who have physically, not disabled, but they have physical issues. So one woman uses a walker. And one day she said to herself, I'm going to do 1,000 steps out in my neighborhood. Well, then the next thing you know, she's at 9,000 steps. And she's stopping for a drink of water. And she said, that last 1,000 is going to be tough, but I think I can make it. And so, you just plow ahead. One man had really breathing issues, but he wanted to go to he was a dentist and he retired. And he wanted to go up to the dentist office where he worked 2 hours a week. Took him 3 bus changes in Manhattan, and each one accompanied with a sit down at a bench because he couldn't breathe, but he did it. And, so you can't say to him, well, you can't do that because you can't. He says, of course I can. I measure myself. He takes care of himself. So, yeah, I mean, people, you're as old as I see it all the time of people. I'll tell the parachuting story. I can't do that. I'm too old. Is there a reason? You come down and you sit on your butt. There's no, you're not breaking legs or anything. So there's lots of, and when you encounter people who are doing it, it's a joy because you can see the smiles on their face, and whatever their ailment, whatever their disability, they work around it. And the other one is that death has no place in their comment. They know it's coming. No big problem. It's part of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one of my professors, he was a guest lecturer. He had suffered from polio as a young child. And he actually said he's at an advantage for that reason, because he didn't, he had to overcome his disability. And so he saw, especially as a male, he saw that helped him because he could see others that were starting to struggle with any, physical declines in aging. So I think that's really interesting.
Cool.
Henry, you've said some really important things today. And it reminds me of just a couple of months ago, my brother who lives in California, he runs Scrabble clubs and Scrabble tournaments. So the pandemic, he was a shut-in, okay?
Yeah.
And his whole life is about words and letters. So in the beginning, he was writing and blogging. We were doing a podcast, but right around April of this year, he just didn't want to do it anymore. And every time I would talk to him, he would tell me about another physical ailment. And I just kept trying to push him. But in August, I believe it was, they started up with his Scrabble clubs again. People started getting together. And in the last 2 months, he is this young, vibrant 79.
They all disappeared. Huh?
Exactly. And I am so blessed because right before the pandemic, he drove cross country and back and forth, and he was vibrant. And then, so those people who are listening to this, it's not too late to kick yourself in the butt.
Yeah, and never too late.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm wondering, I have 2 questions. One is, are you planning to write a book about this or publish something, or have you published something?
No, I haven't. I've toyed with the idea, but I'm pretty busy, so I'm giving 3 and 4 talks a week, and that's
wow,
up my time.
Well, hopefully when you slow down, I'm glad that you're busy. When you have a lull,
Yeah.
I think, and maybe the right time will happen when it's right, because it sounds like you're still gathering lots of stories and information that maybe will inform a future book, since
That's right. I'm always, every place I go, I get new stories and new experiences and new because we're all different. That's the beauty of this thing. We're all different.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm signing up to buy a book when you sell them.
Okay. Thank you.
I think our listeners will too. Is there a place where we can find you, a website, or where can we connect with you?
It's hmqpublisher.com.
Okay. hmqpublisher.com.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any final questions, Karen?
No, I'm just going to start following you, Henry. I already clicked on your Facebook page so I could follow
Thank you, thank you.
And we'll make sure that's in the show notes as well. And I
Great.
want all of our listeners, I don't care what age you are on the spectrum. If you don't vitalize yourself, you're going to become stagnant. And I've seen 20-year-olds and 40-year-olds and now 70 and 80-year-olds who say, I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. Henry, when you said you don't have the time, it's because you're busy doing a lot of things. But if you had said, I don't have the time, but I'm just going to sit here in front of my computer all day, that would be different. So to everybody out there, find your strength and make it shine.
Find your passion. It's still very, very important. And I'll leave everyone with, don't leave anything on the table. Life is meant to be lived, to be enjoyed.
Love it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Come back anytime. We love you.
Okay, thanks
Take
again.
care,
Bye,
everybody.
Thank
Elise.
you.
Karen.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.